Hey everyone, welcome to the second video of my series of player reviews for the 2020 tennis season. In my previous video, I went over the world number 1 Novak Djokovic's 2020, and in this one, I'm going to be going over the year that it was for the world number 2 in Rafael Nadal. It was another solid season for the Spaniard, one where he didn't play very much due to the nature of the circumstances around the world that altered the tennis calendar. However, when he did play, he was quite effective. There were some minor letdowns, however, they were overshadowed by the biggest highlight of his year in winning his 13th French Open title and clinching a record equaling 20th major in the process. With another major title and another top 2 finish, there really wasn't all that much that was left to be desired for Rafa fans. So without further ado, let's jump into the year that was Rafa Nadal's 2020. Rafa came into 2020 having finished 2019 as the world number 1, and it was a really busy end of 2019, one that was more loaded than what the ends to his seasons and beginnings to a new year typically look like. Having played a rigorous Davis Cup campaign that ended in victory but extended his 2019 season more than what was expected, this resulted in a really quick turnaround into 2020 as he played that exhibition in Abu Dhabi, as a lot of the top players typically do to kick off their seasons. And he played some really good tennis there to win that exhibition, but for those who saw the final with him and Tsitsipas, it was a rigorous, grueling match that went well over the 3-hour mark, and despite it being an exhibition, it was clear that neither player held any punches in that match. And then to follow that up, there was ATP Cup this year, which is a very enjoyable tournament, but again, just like Davis Cup, Rafa had to put in double duty with doubles at times, and towards the tail end of that ATP Cup, I think that there was clear fatigue present in Rafa, and it just seemed that all those matches over the past month or so had taken their toll. And despite somewhat of a silver lining in Rafa playing Djokovic, who was playing very well in their ATP Cup final match, about as well as he has in a very long time, particularly in the second set, it just seemed that Rafa's prospects of winning the Australian Open this year were really an uphill battle, and that fatigue already seemed to manifest itself at ATP Cup, as I don't think he was ever really at his best consistently there, and it continued into Melbourne. He was a bit sloppy in his opening couple rounds. However, his form did take a considerable leap from the third round on. However, I don't think the draw did him any favors. Despite being the number 1 seed still, he was dealt with Nick Kyrgios playing very well in the 4th round, which he was able to come through impressively. And then in the quarters, facing a red-hot Dominic Thiem, he held his own quite well in that match. It very easily could have gone the other way. He had his chances and caught a couple of bad breaks as far as net cords in that match. Being an avid Nadal fan, it obviously hurt that he wasn't able to consolidate the leads he had in either of the opening 2 sets, but all in all, it wasn't a bad loss considering his form had picked up over the last 2 matches, played 2 very high-quality matches. But things just swung Thiem's way that day, and he was a very deserving victor. This loss in the quarters, combined with Djokovic winning the tournament, saw Nadal's ranking drop to 2, and it'd stay there the rest of the year. But prior to the suspension of the tour in March, he did play one more tournament in Acapulco, and I don't think he really needed his best throughout this tournament. There were a lot of upsets that really opened up this draw, and I felt that he won this title playing on a second gear. He was able to get away with that because He never really ran into anybody that pushed him outside his comfort zone, and it was smooth sailing all the way. He didn't drop a set en route to his first title of the year and the first of his now 3 Acapulco titles on a hard court. It turned out that would be the last we'd see of Rafa Nadal all the way up until September on the clay of Rome. Having decided to sit out the American hard court events that took place in the New York bubble immediately following the restart, Nadal opted to focus on clay and try to be 100% through that brief clay court season in Rome and Roland Garros, as opposed to defending his title at the US Open. I have to admit that I didn't love this decision initially, and being such an avid Rafa fan and being starved of watching him play tennis since March, that definitely had a big part to cloud my judgment on that, but ultimately it was the right decision for him, because making such a trip to the States was very risky, and bottom line, every year Rafa Nadal comes into a year in decent form and in good health. His goal for those seasons are always the French Open, and playing the Open followed by 2 clay court events that were barely separated from one another at the age of 34 would have been quite dicey, and in all likelihood definitely would have compromised his chances at winning the French. It was a scheduling decision that made sense and seemed like it was immediately paying off when he breezed through his opening 2 matches in Rome, looking poised to sweep the field on clay yet again. Our victory parade, however, came to a screeching halt in the next round as the undersized but always feisty Diego Schwartzman scored his first win over Rafa by sweeping him aside quite convincingly to seemingly overnight turn the tennis world on red alert. Now, there were a lot of factors that went into this loss. Of course, Nadal, his first tournament back since March, and Diego being his first significant test, and he simply didn't have his A game to really one-up the challenge of Schwartzman perhaps playing the match of his life, and Diego's almost always played Rafa quite tough, so on one of the few days that Rafa didn't have the game to one-up Schwartzman's challenge, that was the result that we got. That being said, I took away from this loss that he'd be better for it. Yeah, he was rusty, but I didn't see anything that was extremely alarming, and ultimately, I think he was better for it, since the loss really highlighted some of the things that he needed to work on ahead of Roland Garros. Perception at this point, though, I think shifted from a premature coronation for his 13th French to this could be the year that Nadal is knocked off at the French again. Heading into this French Open, I think that it seemed like a perfect storm of things that were working against Nadal and for Djokovic, and as a result, heading into the tournament, I think a lot of experts, a good portion of them, were rolling with Djokovic over Nadal to hoist that French Open trophy at the end of the fortnight. Yeah, we'd seen Nadal lose in the past prior to the French in the lead-up tournaments and bounce back to win the French with ease, but this year it just seemed like it was too much to overcome, with Dominic Thiem being in his half, the ball bouncing lower due to the tournament being held in the fall with cooler conditions, the new balls being used this year being heavier that weren't to Rafa's liking either. However, once the tournament started, it seemed like business as usual. Rafa rolled through on his way to the quarters, where he faced Jannik Sinner instead of Sasha Zverev, who was his projected quarterfinal opponent. The teenage sensation in Jannik Sinner put up a very good fight to the King of Clay, and actually gave him quite a scare in the opening set, where he was serving for the first set, and I don't think Rafa played particularly well through the first half of this match, and he even got down a break in the second, but trailing a break in the second, I think the switch was flipped right here. He closed that match playing very well and at a level that I don't think he really needed up until this point. And from that point on, he just got better and better, played even better in the Schwartzman match, a little hiccup in the third, but his play was night and day from when they'd last faced in Rome, and we looked to be in for quite the final. I, like most people, expected a grueling 4 or 5 setter regardless of who won, and while I believe that Nadal did play himself into form through the course of this tournament, it was still nothing that was reminiscent of some of his most dominant runs at the French Open, like 08, 2017, 2012. It was nothing imperious, but it was good enough to where I felt that he could put himself in position to grind out a win. What actually ended up happening in that final, that imperious Nadal of years past actually did show up, seemingly out of nowhere, as he put up one of the performances of his career to dismantle the guy who was been the toughest rival of Rafa Nadal's career in Novak Djokovic, who was yet to lose a completed match on the season to that point. Winning the 13th French and 20th major of his career essentially solidified that the 2020 tennis season had been a success for Rafa Nadal, regardless of his results following that tournament. With the status of tennis being played the rest of the year being up in the air back in March, and Nadal only getting older, it was massive for him to be able to get even with Federer in the Slams race this year itself. I would be lying to you if I said it didn't hurt that he couldn't win one of Paris or the World Tour Finals at the end of the year, though. It's always those goddamn indoor hard courts, man. We can never seem to get over the hump. Wait, I'm supposed to be objective, my bad, kinda broke character there. So, about that indoor season following the French Open. A lot of us Nadal fans were very optimistic about his chances at both Paris and the World Tour Finals this year, considering this was one of the very rare times that Rafa was coming into the end of the year indoor hardcourt season fresh, without as much mileage on his body. And it looked even better when Djokovic and team weren't in the draw to play Paris, and if Rafa had his A game, it seemed that he would win that title. He did not have his A game, however, throughout the week, and he struggled his way to the semis, where he was beaten by a very in-form Sasha Zverev. Getting those matches under his belt ultimately did help him play much better at the Nitto ATP Finals. He played perhaps the match of the year as far as quality in the round robin against Dominic Thiem, and was able to come out of his group second. This saw him make the semifinals, where he would be put up against Daniil Medvedev, who was riding high on confidence after going undefeated in his group and coming off a title in Paris. This semifinal was hands down, I think, for Nadal fans, one of the most frustrating losses we've taken in quite a while. It seemed like a golden opportunity for Rafa to lock down his first World Tour Finals title here. He was playing very well, and he'd put himself in position to close this semi out in straights. But when he served for it in the second set, a combination of Medvedev playing a terrific return game and Rafa playing a bit of a loose game to get broken cost him that match ultimately, as Medvedev pretty much battened down the hatches from this point, and by the time they'd gotten into the third set, Rafa was pretty winded. Medvedev had worn him down, and he had pretty much nothing left in the tank by midway through the third set. It stung to lose that match, but I think that Rafa, as well as his fans, would have taken that French Open title if it meant he even lost at the first round at every other tournament he played this year. So, as disappointing as that World Tour Finals campaign ended, he still played a great tournament to cap off his season. Overall, I would grade his 2020 season as an A-. It was more of the same of what we've seen from Rafa going back to the beginning of this second prime he's found since 2017. Very consistent in pretty much every tournament he played. Any year he wins a slam, it's a success at this point, even though he probably would have wanted to add to his trophy cabinet in particularly Paris and London. But having played so little tennis this year, I still think he put together a very solid season, still able to finish in the top 2, albeit aided by the revised ranking system. But even in a normal tennis calendar, I think this is where his ranking would have ended up at the end of this season anyways. I would say A- just because relative to what he's been since 2017, I think there was a very slight regression in how he had a couple of bad losses to Goffin at ATP Cup and Schwartzman in Rome. You can chalk those up to fatigue and rust, honestly, I do, but that as well as the fact that the younger guys seemed to get a better read on him this year, I felt that prior to this season, those younger guys had the hardest time beating Rafa of the big 3, but this season, Thiem got him twice on 2 of the biggest stages, Medvedev got his first win on him, Zverev got him in Paris, so it'll be interesting to see if that carries over into the next season. Speaking of which, as far as how I think he'll do next year, I would say that he's going to stay at number 2, maybe slips to number 3, but I would lean 2 at this point for the same reason that I said Djokovic would stay at number 1. It's just those 2 guys' consistency. Even at this stage in their careers, I still trust both their consistency more than I do with Thiem, Medvedev, Tsitsipas, and Zverev, even though those guys are in the midst of their prime years. I think 2021 will be another year that Rafa takes home the French, and with how he's adapted his game in that second prime I mentioned of his, I say he's still going to be a very strong contender to win every other major. Maybe not the favorite at any of those other majors, but I think he'll be right up there as a contender at all 3 of those other majors. But with that was my review for Rafael Nadal's 2020 tennis season. I hope that those of you watching enjoyed as much as I enjoyed making this particular one for reasons. But thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all on the next one.